E ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā rangatira mā. Nau mai whakarongo mai ki te hōtaka nei, tōku pōti, tēnā rā koutou, ko toi kai rāku iti tōku ingoa. My name's Toy and welcome to My Vote, a show that seeks to empower you, inform you, and get you out there voting. This morning we have 3 candidates for the Whakatane Ōhope Award here to let us know what they're about, who they are, and why you should vote for them. We have Nandor Tanczos, Victor Luca, and Steve Sopora, and I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. You first, Nandor. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora mai tātou. Kia ora, Toy. It's great to be here, and it's great to see a platform like this, which is about getting people, face to face or voice to voice with candidates, and get to understand what's going on, what the elections are about, and who's standing. So my name's Nandor Tanczos. I'm an elected councillor. I was elected at the last election, and been living in Whakatane about 5 years. My wife's from Murupara, and and I guess it's just great. It's great to be here today.
Good to have you here too, bro.
I'm not quite sure what we're looking for in this bit.
No, you're under a minute, so it's all good. We're on time, Nandor. Steve, kia ora. Introduce yourself.
Kia ora. I'm Steve Sopora, and I'm really happy to be here today. Thanks for the invitation, Toy. My wife and I moved to New Zealand about 7 years ago, and we're really planning to spend the rest of our lives here in Whakatane. So as a result of that, I just want to make a difference and kind of make Whakatane a great place to be for the rest of my life and for the rest of the lives of our future generations. Basically, I'm retired, but I'm quite young, I think. I'm still in my 50s, so I have a lot of energy and enthusiasm to do something. I'm an engineer with a master's degree in business, and I've spent a good part of my career working in environmental technologies such as wastewater treatment, water treatment chemicals, and also have worked in financing large projects, getting them across the line, and worked a little bit in technology commercialization as well. So I've been quite practical in my career and focused on getting things done, and hope that I can do something for our community.
Kia ora, Steve. Thanks for coming along. Victor.
Morena.
Morena.
Yeah, my name is Victor Luca. I was born in Whakatane in 1961. I was raised here and went to high school here. I went to Wellington where I did my university. I've got a doctorate in chemistry. I guess you could say I saw climate change coming a long way off, so a lot of my research has been directed towards climate or environmental materials is what I've been involved in developing. So I've worked on things like development of lithium-ion batteries, materials for water decontamination, radioactive waste management, and technology for converting the sun's light into hydrogen and oxygen by by splitting water. I'm back in Whakatane, my roots. I think it's a hard place to beat on this planet. And I'm here to make it better. I want to make Whakatane great again.
Good. Hey, I see you corrected your pronunciation there. You're about to say Whakatane, you changed to Whakatane. It's a good start.
It used to be that either or was okay, but now it's not.
No, it's not. That's right. You're on the right side of history there, Victor. Kia ora koutou. Thanks for coming along and to have a kōrero with us and with our audience. Climate change. It's great to have you all along with your range of expertise, your range of experience. So this is an open discussion. I want to talk about Whakatane and climate change. What are the biggest challenges for this town and this district? Because it is a big district as well. And so there's some variation on how it will actually affect the different parts of the Whakatane district, climate change. Yes, please, kōrero mai.
Well, for me, on the solving the problem side of things, it's really our personal transportation. We always want to point at others when it comes to climate change, blame the oil companies, blame the government for not acting quickly enough. And then we're waiting for electric cars, we're waiting for other technologies. But at the end of the day, it's our own consumption that's a big part of the problem.
So you're talking transportation there, Steve?
Yeah, our use of cars and other things.
Because when we're talking about changing over to, say, electric vehicles, and I'll throw this over to you, Victor, lithium-ion batteries are not the most healthy products. They're actually quite toxic, aren't they? So switching over to electric vehicles, if we all changed over to electric vehicles, there is, and it also depends where that electricity comes from. If it's coming from coal-fired plants.
Well, I think what I noticed is there's a lot of uninformed discussion on the subject. There was a chap that spoke on Talkback Radio a few weeks ago on lithium-ion batteries. Clear to me, doesn't really know much about it, and yet he's out there talking as if he's an expert. I mean, I think we have to transform the transportation sector, but it is only 17% of New Zealand's emissions. So let's get that in perspective. We have to look at where the emissions are coming from. So transport's 17%. If we can clean it up, that's a good thing. In terms of electrification of transport, you have to do what's called a life cycle analysis. So you have to calculate the CO2 emissions in the whole life cycle of the product, starting from the mining of the materials. That produces CO2 because you've got to dig stuff up from the ground, you've got to separate it out, and then you've got to put it into a battery that requires aluminium, might be carbon fibre and all the rest of it. All of that has to be summed up. And if you look at the data that's out there, and I've been into it for a long time, you can see that electrification of transport certainly does, there are lower life cycle emissions, but sometimes it's not as low as you think. And it does depend, as you said, to some extent on where the electricity is coming from. In New Zealand, we're quite fortunate because 85% of the electricity that we produce does come from hydro, and that's pretty clean. Other places where you're using coal to produce electricity, probably the life cycle emissions for cars doesn't really favour electric vehicles that much. And then there's the drivetrain that also contributes a lot. You've got to look at all the parts of the cycle, and you've got to analyse. It's not easy to do.
Sure.
Can I just jump in there? Because at council, one of the things we've been looking at is changing our fleet to more electric and hybrid. There's some vehicle use that's very difficult to change because, there's not the alternatives, but we can go a long way. We can produce 20% reduction in emissions pretty quickly. And you're right, it is looking at the full life cycle of the vehicle. And the evidence that we've got is pretty strong that there is a definite advantage in moving towards electric, especially in a country like us and an area like us where we've got such high renewables. But the thing is, it's not just changing the vehicles. We've got to change how we get around, and that means we've got to start to invest first in more active transport. We're a flat town. It's really easy to cycle around, and the cycle facilities are terrible. We've got some lovely things like the cycleway up Gorge Road. Beautiful to cycle. I go up there quite regularly. Getting onto it from Commerce Street, the cycle lane suddenly disappears, and you have to get through the most dangerous bit, through the roundabouts, on your own. There's walking along Landing Road, trying to cross Landing Road. There's a whole lot of stuff we need to. How do you work those sorts of things
actually into the is that in the long-term plan?
So we've got an active whakatane strategy, which we've engaged with the community really strongly on, and that's because of the election that's kind of in a bit of a hiatus. But the idea is that those documents are available, and you look at what we need to do is create these connected networks around the town. So there's the thinking that's being done around that. The next step is you've got to have the investment, because the government had this money, like extra money for this, and they were for councils, and councils all over the country were so eager, they've gone, oh, heck, we're not going to do that anymore. There's too much demand. So, we've actually got to start to invest in these things. Plus, we don't have any realistic public transport. And we have to start thinking, we've got a carbon-constrained future. We've got a fossil fuel-constrained future. How are we going to what's that going to mean for us? We've got to start thinking about that stuff in the long-term picture.
Some horses from Whārua of Ruatoki. We've got a few of them up there. Hey, but and those are the challenges. And I just wanted to quickly bring this because the reality is how we use carbon. You're saying it's going to be a carbon restricted future, but in terms of our population here in New Zealand, we're not going to have a huge effect on the actual climate shift on the planet. And so it's nearly like a moral ethical issue that we do participate in reducing our carbon outputs. Our carbon outputs compared to the rest of the world aren't going to make a difference. But we are going to have to deal with the effects of climate change. Yeah. So I'm just shifting gear there a little bit.
Well, can I say just one more thing on
Sure, Steve.
On your point?
Yeah.
I think we have to look at things just a little bit differently. I fully agree with what Nandor has said, and as well as Victor. But where I was starting to go when I first started speaking was that as individuals, as the people of Whakatane, we're waiting for things to happen. We continue to drive our cars, and we're not really thinking about what we can do. So
because you have an environmental engineering background, you've dealt with wastewater systems, and so that's where I was wanting to head towards. What impact is climate change going to have on our infrastructure, and how are we going to prepare for the shifts that are going to happen?
As I was saying, individually, we just have to all think about this and all reduce. So one thing we can do individually, one thing I'm doing is if I'm elected, I'm going to take the bus to council meetings. And I've actually calculated that that's going to have about a 12% impact on my personal CO2 emissions.
Sure.
And that's huge. And an empty bus drives by my house several times a day. So I think there's things lots of us can do if we just thought about it to have an impact now before all of these great things in the future
it's
actually
finding
come
that
to
balance
fruition.
between our personal behaviours, but also the systemic change
I
that
agree.
we need. But just on your thing about New Zealand's emissions, first of all, we are one of the highest per capita emitters in the world, and you've got to deal with this on a per capita basis because you can't compare New Zealand against China and say, well, they've got these huge emissions, because they've got huge numbers of people. You've got to do it on a per capita basis. But the other thing is the biggest emitters are actually small nations together. We're actually, like, small nations collectively are huge. And so New Zealand does have a really significant impact in terms of our political leadership and our global leadership, especially for small nations.
Because we can't hold the moral high ground if we're not per capita. We're terrible.
That's right.
So in terms of I just want to shift over to in terms of Whakatane. We have a PGF here coming in for the development of the CBD. Common sense sort of dictates that when you look at the CBD, it's very close to the waterline. Is that an issue with any of you guys in terms of our infrastructure, what we currently have, and what we need to have to accommodate climate change and some of these shifts that are going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? What do you guys say?
Look, I don't want to dominate the debate because, but having sat through numerous workshops around the town regeneration program, one of the things, and this is a thing I've been asking from the very first question, is what does climate change mean for this? You know, how are we positioning ourselves in terms of what's coming at us in the 21st century? And this is across all of, and you know, the whole thing about the impacts of climate change, which was your starting question. There's a whole lot to go into there. But in terms of specifically the town regeneration and the boat harbour, one of the things about it is it's about making our town more resilient, because that funding actually enables us to invest in resilience and more robust infrastructure as well. So, for example, the boat harbour. So, first of all, it's taking boats off the river, out of the stream of the river. So it's like flood protection. By having this kind of enclosed space, you can create more flood protection around it. It means that the boats, when they're dumping their bilge water and whatever, they're doing it not out to sea, but in a contained environment. And so there's, when they refuel, it's going to be within a contained environment. So part of the thinking around all of that program is around how do we make it more sustainable and how do we make it more resilient. So it's in the thinking.
Sure.
I just wanted to wind back just one step on carbon footprint. And so we focused on transport, but everything contributes to a person's climate CO2 footprint. That includes the house you live in. The average house is 80 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So you've really got to be holistic about it.
Sure.
In terms of climate change, what does it mean for us? Well, I think science has been fairly clear. We're going to get, in Aotearoa, we're going to get more extreme weather events. So we're going to get more flooding and we're going to get more dry spells. More flooding, we've got to reinforce our flood.
It's like an oxymoron, doesn't it? You get more flooding and more dry spells.
Well,
We get the same amount of water, but we get it
More concentrated. Sure. Yeah.
It's climate science.
Yeah.
But if we do get more flooding, then we need to focus we can bandy around these words like resilience and whatnot, but how do we build in resilience? Well, what are we going to need? I've seen the river at about 30 centimetres from the top of those stop banks at the end of Magavi Road in the last few years. Should we think about raising the stop banks? We certainly need an escape route, and the only thing we've got is really one bridge. And so I've been hammering that point. And I know the council's been banging on about it for a while. It's been on and off and on and off. And I think central government knows it has to come to the party, because we're not going to be able to do this sort of thing with just raising rates all the time. It has to come from central government. Central government is going to have to find ways to produce, to make available more funding so that these flood protection measures can be implemented at our level.
But we're all small towns along the coastlines are all competing for that money, aren't they, Nandor? Because you've been a part of that with our NZTA.
Yeah, look, I met with Simon Bridges when he was Minister of Transport. We've met numerous times with LTNZ. The problem is that in Whakatane, we all understand the arguments about why we need a second bridge. Convincing central government to come to the party is a very big challenge, because it's not just the roads. We're all also asking for help with the infrastructure. All councils around the country have got their consents coming up. They're going to have to do, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water. It's all going to have to be at a higher standard, so it's going to increase cost. It's going to have to be more robust and more resilient to climate change. So all across the country, local government faces really big challenges. And, and just to come back to this question of looking at the impact. So, yes, we're going to have extreme weather events, more droughts. We've got a rising water table, which is an issue for the Rangitaiki Plains. And then you've got to go to the next level. What does that actually mean? It means you look at the Edgecombe flood. When that happened, our roads were out. It means, so roading infrastructure is an issue. Our water infrastructure is at risk. How we grow food is an issue. It's a global issue, and I think we have to start thinking seriously about food sovereignty.
And you've been talking about just a total mindset cultural shift that needs to happen.
It's a civilization shift. The Chinese are talking about making an ecological civilization, and okay, we can argue about how serious they are, but we have to transform our civilization. We have to think about all of this. You think about the Kaingaroa Plains and the forest there and the susceptibility to fires. We don't even think about forest fires over here, but you look at what's going on overseas and you go, we start to get that happening here.
We get those big long dry spells.
We've got to get our heads around how big this is, and hearing people say, "Oh, it's not that big an issue," seriously.
Systemic,
and the science is telling us the predictions that we've been making. It's getting it's faster and it's worse than what we predicted. So we have to get real.
And there's a positive to all this, though, and that is that we have to get moving immediately. We have to start working on this, but we don't have to do it all in 1 year.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of decades probably, to implement a lot of these.
We have to start.
But we have to start now. We have to start now.
If we say we've got a couple of decades, then generally we go, okay, the pressure comes off, but we need to feel like there's that pressure.
Exactly, and that's the thing. We have to take advantage of the time we have, so that we can do this in bite-sized steps and get things done every year. Have a certain amount of our budget allocated to climate change response things, stop banks, flood control, all of these things, and gradually build our resilience over time. But it doesn't have to be $1 billion tomorrow. It has to, but it has to be something tomorrow.
There is the fiscal implications. This is why I did want to talk to you, Steve, about it, because if you're listening to Nandor, and there is a cultural shift and mindset shift, that just freaks out the farmers and the horticulturalists and people who go, oh, we need economic growth and there's just going to be all this pain. With your business, master in business, how does that work? How do we make that mindset shift and still accommodate the dominant culture of capitalism within our society?
Well, I mean, I think capitalism is a must, because without it, we don't have any income.
We need to evolve capitalism, though?
I agree. Yes, we do. And I think the key is to get everybody on Nandor's way of thinking, but to do it at a manageable pace. You can't force immediate shutdowns of agriculture, because we have to eat. We have to create incomes for our families. But at the same time, everybody has to have the understanding that if we don't do something, it's going to be a problem. So it's about taking advantage of the technologies we have today and implementing them. but realizing that these aren't the final solutions. We're going to have to work on this for a long time. So it's a continuous improvement game, not a let's wait for the magic bullet game, right. or a game where we think we have to spend everything today and it's too hard, so we don't do it. This is something we have to do for the rest of our lives, and our kids are going to have to do for the rest of their lives, and we need to begin doing something today, and that's really my point.
Kia ora. I wanted to bring over to you, Victor, because you're.
Can I just respond?
Sure.
There was something said that I don't agree with.
Okay.
We don't have decades. A certain amount of climate change is already baked into the system.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We can expect 1.5 degrees C warming, if not more, by what we've already put up there. So there's nothing we can do to undo that, and so we have to get prepared, and we don't have time. We've got to move now, and it isn't just science and technology has got there are solutions, but it's a socio-economic problem at the end of the day. It's how much do you want to leave a better world for your kids? How much do you love your kids and your kids' kids? That's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
And you're moving into politics from a scientific background. I just want to keep this with you, Victor. You're coming from a scientific background where you've dealt with the data, and and I appreciate what you're saying. And you're saying it's a socio-economic issue, but there's also a political issue, and you're moving into politics, local government. What are you going to do politically? How are you going to make that shift? Because ultimately, if there is no political motivation, we're not going to get anywhere.
Well, I think education has got a lot to do with it. I mean, a lot of people... I asked for a show of hands at the Whakatane High School debate on how many people believe the science on climate change, believe that humans were the main cause, and I think that only about 60% of people put their hands up. I've been in meetings, there's a National Party meeting that was held in the Bridge Club where you could see that there were a lot of deniers present. I mean, I even spoke with one chap who was just walking around with a car full of books from a guy called Morano, who was a climate change denier. And really, deniers are in the minority. And shrinking. But people don't. They get a disproportionate voice. The deniers, and I think there are vested interests that try to push it. But the science is clear. I mean, as far as consensus among scientists is concerned, it's 97%. Anyone who works in the area really knows, who is an expert. When we want to know something, we go to experts. The experts are telling you with one voice that there is a massive consensus out there. So this is, we talk about likelihood all the time. Nothing is 100%. But it's, we can't take the risk, and it's a socio-economic problem, and socio-economic problems and politics are one and the same thing, aren't they? And what is politics? It's just argue. What are we doing? Just arguing semantics or something? No, we're trying to solve problems for people. That's what it's about.
And I think we all agree in general, but just on the timeline basis, I mean, the IPCC, which is the United Nations body, they say we need to reduce our carbon emissions by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030. So that's a 6% per year reduction over the next decade, and to zero by 2050. So on the reduction side, we have theoretically 30 years to reduce to zero, if you believe what the United Nations says.
Sure.
And then on the response side, again, we're not going to get these climate impacts tomorrow. We might get a storm tomorrow, but it's a gradually building issue. And again, we have time to respond. And I think I totally agree with what everybody at the table is saying, but we have to start today. We have to start responding today.
And we do need to start
and we
today.
don't have to do it all by tomorrow. So it's not as big a challenge to get this going as many people think. So
it's a huge challenge.
A lot of people are sitting on their hands doing nothing because it's a big challenge.
Kia ora, Steve.
Can I say, I think you came to it before. It's a political issue. The thing is, we have the solution. And I mean, I think targets are useful, but let's not get locked into arguing about targets and timelines. The thing is, we know what we have to do, and we know how to do it. And the thing is, for me, it's an opportunity to do things. But this is the thing: people aren't driven by fear. That turns people off and shuts people down. People are driven by opportunity, and this is an opportunity to do things differently, to do things better than we've done them before. I'll give you an example. We know that one of our big emissions is agricultural methane. We know it's a huge problem. Now, you look at farming economists like Peter Fraser. They're talking about you can reduce your farm emissions significantly. You can increase your profitability by reducing your stocking rates. Reducing your stocking rates means as a farmer you're less stressed, you're making more money, and you're reducing your emissions. This is a win-win kind of scenario. And so we get locked into this argument about with some sections of the farming community.
There, because the thing is, I find once we start talking about the science of it and the timelines and the percentages, which often can dominate the debate, for the general public, you lose them.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about the narrative, because ultimately we've got to inspire people, don't we, to make those shifts.
Look, we've created this civilization where we've got more wealth than we've ever had in the world. Most of the people are working harder than they've ever worked before. Some people aren't working at all and got no money. It's like, things are getting quicker, changing more, getting more and more stressful. And we actually need to slow the heck down and create a world that's, what is it that makes life worth living? It's our relationships with each other, spending time with our family and our friends, enjoying, a barbecue.
So you're actually saying it's a values thing, because this is the one issue with capitalism is the values get skewed. Accumulation, which is quite often fear-based.
Yeah.
We're not going to have enough, so you must accumulate as much as you can and have more than the other person, because then that secures your security for you and your family.
It's all individualized. We've got to become more collective.
So,
because you look at resilience. How do we create a more resilient community? Yes, we need to work on our infrastructure and things like that. That's true. But real resilience comes from community. It comes from knowing people and being there to help each other out when times get hard. That's real resilience.
And that's real values as well. That's the thing with capitalist values is you must accrue more and accumulate more for yourself, for your own security. Whereas when you switch it around, you have abundance all around you, and the values of relationships.
And those are traditional values. They're traditional Māori values, they're traditional Pākehā values, they're traditional African values, traditional Muslim values. Human values all around the world are collective values because we're a collective species. That's our nature.
Well, related to that then, if we're all about, relationships, then we have relationships to our offspring and their offspring. Yes. And so we have to think of how much we love the people who are coming.
That's right.